Hi, everyone. Welcome to ITRA Art Society. The Art Society is a virtual program hosted by ITRA that provides a platform for artists, curators, educators, and guest speakers. Before the present circumstances with the pandemic that have affected all projects and programs across institutions across the world, ITRA was hosting these sessions in person. But given the circumstances, ITRA would like to take this opportunity to bring these conversations to wider audiences, which is what initiated the platform. I invite all of you to find more information about the platform online through ITRA's programming announcements. I believe this is the third in a series of discussions. I'm Rahul Godipudi. I'm exhibitions curator at Art Jameel, and I contribute towards research and exhibitions at the Jameel Art Center in Dubai and upcoming projects and programs at High Creative Hub, which is Art Jameel's upcoming center in Jeddah. I want to welcome all of you to join me for an informal conversation with Muhannad. Muhannad Shono is an artist based in Riyadh, perhaps most familiar with his recent project at Desert X and Al Ula recently. I hope you will get a closer look at his art practice through the course of our time together. We will go through about 8 to 10 of his works and projects from the last 3 years and use that as a way to hopefully understand the central role of narrative, illustration, and a wider notion, expanded notion of pigment in his art practice. Before we begin, particularly for those that have just joined us, I want to remind you again to change your chat settings to all panelists and attendees, and also to use the Q&A option for questions, because it's much easier for us to parse through the questions. And it's very easy to miss the questions if they come through the chat. So please use the Q&A option for questions. At the end of the session, and I'm hoping we'll have some time, about 20 minutes, perhaps more for questions, hopefully. And it'll be lovely to have some of you also dial in through audio, for which what you would have to do is just raise your hand, and Noura, who's with us, will help us let you in and speak for about 20 seconds. You might have a question, comments. I would just advise you to keep them short so we can have more people come in, about 2 to 3 questions. And without much further ado, I'm just gonna share my screen. Hi, Muhannad.
Hi, Rahul. Let's
do this. It's lovely to be able to do this with you. Of course, we've worked on different projects over time, but it's also a lovely way to bring other people into these discussions that we've had over the last 2 years. And I thought we could begin with your first project in 2017, which is Living Ideas. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this work?
Yes, this project happened during one of my early art residencies at part of the Artisan Labs program in Zurich. And I was embedded with a microbiology lab, which seems kind of not the right fit for an artist, but I was very intrigued in the process of science, the method, and I was exposed to some really incredible research that was being done by the researchers in the field of microbiology, studying bacteria. And sometimes these projects would go on for 3 to 5 years, true dedication from these scientists. So, during my time there, I was, like I said, exposed to a lot of these very in-depth and serious projects. But slowly I found myself in different kinds of discussions with the scientists, where they were sort of seemingly opening up about who they were and less about the bacteria they were studying. So I did sense that there was a feeling of, maybe because they saw me as an artist, that they could kind of open up about things that were not related to their research, and wanted to engage in questions about, is this meaningful? Is this useful to society, to the human race? Is this worth this 3 to 5 year endeavor? will it touch people as art does? Which was a astounding comment, because they're actually working on maintaining people's health. So very quickly, I realized that the project needed to be about the scientists. So we started through these dialogues to develop these little idea organisms that embodied that individual person's, essence and their life work. And these organisms, or these little sculptures, were also designed in such a way that they could naturally latch on to the very unique surface of the lab, which was like this perforated concrete wall, so that they could kind of very seamlessly latch on. And it was a place for ideas, and thus an idea organism would naturally thrive in that kind of environment. So at the end of the residency, what we did after these many talks, we engaged with all the scientists. We came together. It was very participatory, and we started to place their idea organisms on this common wall, and we started to connect them using a 3D printing pen, creating a sort of a mind map, or a human connection network of how ideas spread. Are they original? Some ideas, of course, fell to the ground because they didn't stick. And some ideas were stuck in their own internal loop and were not connected to anybody else. And people became aware of this kind of situation.
Right.
So, it started off about bacteria and ended up being about the humans that are studying them.
Very personal. For me, there's a couple of things that are really compelling about this work. And one of the reasons to begin with this work, to get into your practice, was just to see to what extent drawing plays a role in your practice, and how very much as you're drawing, these organisms come to life. They have their own characteristics, they're living, non-living forms, but very often have almost sensibilities. And to then, for these to represent also, when you zoom out, an expanded notion of all of these practices collectively, and also all of the apprehensions collectively, which very often are social apprehensions. Like the STS studies is a relatively new field. But of course, a lot of people that practice the sciences, especially to do with health, are really concerned about, as you said, the years of time that they put in, and whether or not that actively affects people's lives and how that might do so.
Yes.
And also to what extent, like your drawing practice, for instance, also generates these forms. When you zoom out, what's interesting also is that some of them stick, some of the ideas stick, and some of the ideas don't stick. And then you also see like these interlinkages, interdependencies and interconnectedness between what are otherwise isolated practices or research. I'd love to move to the next work, and of course we can come back to the works as well as we go through. Al-Akhirah was a work that you did the following year. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about the title and what the title represents, and how that in a way brings into the narrative of the work.
Yes, Al-Akhirah was, it's an Arabic word for tribe. So anything, it's derived from the number 10. So anything greater than 10 becomes a tribe. And Al-Akhirah is the person that the tribe sort of returns to, or the birth of the tribe returns to an individual. So the work was a narrative-based work with multiple installations, in a singular experience, and it tells a story, in this kind of speculative future where narrative was considered detrimental to our human species. So they, in an attempt to save us from our stories, we sent a handful of mankind into space as seeds, and each one of them were encased in a skin of technology. And these seeds were then planted on a distant planet and allowed to germinate and grow. So the individuals who grew within these skins of technology were not aware that this was not natural per se. And the purpose of this skin of technology was to censor stories. So the people of this tribe were no longer able to tell stories to each other. But of course, this human nature to tell stories rises up until an individual from the tribe lifts his or her helmet and tells the first story of this tribe. And then another person will remove their helmet and hear that first story and then transmit it again. So this transmission and this act of removing that technological skin and allowing for a narrative to spread within the community or tribe, becomes ironically detrimental to this tribe, because once they remove this skin that protected them, they have doomed themselves. So, but ironically, again, al-Ashira, the one individual leaves that planet, that tribe, returns back to us and descends from the heavens like a traveler and brings us the story of his people.
Right. What's, for me, really interesting about this work is that it really gives a glimpse into the role of narrative in some of your practices and most of your practices, but some places there it's a lot more apparent. And of course, the narrative is speculative, but it also reflects on shared sort of human condition across different cultures and geolocations as well, simultaneously, while being very much fictional, while being very much an imaginary. So this beauty between that fiction and something that reflects on us as human beings across different cultures, I think, is compelling. And also I'm really drawn to how from seeds, these organisms, these people grow. And as they grow and as they habitate and as they share their stories, their worlds or their truths that they share, in a sense, also become the beginnings of their demise. So in a way, the collective memories that they choose to represent become their undoing. I also wanted to just make a note about how you use fabric and paper and the role of pigment as well. So yes, we'll see this thread running through your practice. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that, about these materials?
Yeah, I mean, the role of the line of ink or the pigment of black, was something that I, experienced very early on as a child, where, growing up here in Saudi Arabia, we were told to strike a line across the neck of things we would create that had life. And this was sort of like a challenge to my kind of creative mind. These characters were alive in my mind. And also, we experienced a lot of, let's say, visuals being censored through or under, beneath a pigment of ink. So this kind of also spurred the imagination, because you were called upon to fill in the gap and imagine what was below this pigment of ink. So a pigment of ink or a line of ink for me is very alive rather than restrictive. It's something that is actually saying a lot. And for this work, I used fabric and to create this scroll as a book that Al carried back to us, and stitching to weave the storyline through the tribe as they remove these helmets.
From the tribe, I also want to jump, and it's a good segue to get into this other work, which was developed at Constantinople, which is also where we met the first time. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this work?
Yeah, this work was also, it was a research-based work, and it was actually, the research side was funded by ISRA during an art residency in Berlin, where I kind of introduced myself to a humanoid robotics lab. The professor didn't want to didn't respond to my first and second, third email. Eventually, you know, I invited him out to lunch, and I was able to kind of bombard him with some ideas, and luckily he got excited. And then he welcomed me into their lab, and we started to develop this, again, speculative work. And it talks about the role of ritual in our life. So, you know, doing research about the role of ritual and my connection to ritual, you know, I realized that, you know, this beautiful role that ritual plays in our emotional health. So rituals traditionally were, in a very crude manner, user manuals to our emotional states. So a ritual is a step-by-step process that covers a certain period of time, and its purpose is to bring you back into emotional balance. Whether you're in sorrow or in celebration, we cannot go into excess. We need to return to society and find balance. And that's what rituals help us to do. Today, our rituals have lost their kind of emotional component, the meaning, if you will. So I imagine these machines, these personal machines that could kind of, in a satirical manner, kind of perform a mechanical, repetitive ritual on our behalf. And you and I could meet up in a cafe, and you can tell me you just got promoted and we want to celebrate, but we no longer have rituals for that celebration. So we both pull out our ritual machines, and they will perform a repetitive act on our behalf.
Right.
All these machines were separate and individualistic, but at the same time, they were programmed to be connected, so that when 2 or 3 people joined the ritual, the machine would experience chaos for a split second, and then they would synchronize, creating
Right.
rhythm and sound.
Speaking of sound, I just want to show everybody a short clip that gives you just an idea of the sound that these machines generate. And when you come across them in person, and especially collectively across a number of machines, what happens is that it becomes almost trance-like, very much like tribal rituals across cultures, very much like these rituals that you speak of, whether they're rituals of greeting, celebration, grief, camaraderie, or comfort. And for me, for instance, one thing that's really interesting about the work is, while it critiques the loss of these rituals that we all share, as one participates with these surrogate machines, the sound and the synchronization also draws you into a ritual. So it has this duality between sort of critiquing the loss of rituals, but also inviting you to participate
Yes.
with these rituals. I'm curious, what were some of the impressions of the people that engaged with the works? If there's something that comes to mind.
I think you know, we thought about creating some sort of manual or demo video, and at some points we had it, but we realized people weren't even paying attention to the video or the instructions, and it was very instinctive, and they were kind of learning from others. So they would see me do it, and then I would step away, not knowing that I was the artist, and then they would do the same, and then someone else would join. So this kind of very natural dissemination of the ritual was also very interesting to observe. It was instinctive, and it was kind of, you know, copy the monkey in front of you.
I want to jump very quickly to the next work that you, also keeping very mindful of time, to the next work that was also developed at Constable. And I want to begin first by showing the video as well.
So again, this work was developed with the Professor Manfred Hild from the same
And of course, the motion and the rhythm almost sort of changes organically, and it just needs a slight impulse which activates them.
Yeah, they're sort of reminders, you know. So the work is a timeline of events. So what I did was I looked at what were certain superpowers at the time of you know, the exploration of Mars in terms of landing on the surface of Mars, and I wanted to overlay that with what was that country doing in terms of techno-colonial intervention in the Arab world at the same time. So the work is a timeline of events. They are sort of, you know, Mars is the Arab world. That's my Mars. I'm not able to travel to the Arab world as an Arab, you know, but what I wanted to do through this work is travel back to events. So I looked at, for example, the first landing where a lander was landed on the surface of Mars with the Soviet Union, 1971. What was the Soviet Union doing in 1971, using its engineering, its prowess, its money, its science, interfering in the Arab world? And in that year, they were interfering or sort of took over the construction of the great dam in Egypt, the Aswan High Dam. So I was kind of like kind of addressing this helplessness and also traveling back to these events. So these become like story landers. They're all etched and carved like books. And as they move, they sort of remind us of the event. And they also kind of flicker glimpses of that past.
So these 5 landers or 5 books, which also tell 2 stories simultaneously, which are the stories of those landings.
Yes.
Along with the other things that happen at the same time, which was techno-colonial in the Arab world.
Interventions in the Arab world.
Yeah. I want to move very quickly to the next work, which is Streams, and Flow States, which is where we see, again, this expanded notion of the line entering into the space, and where you begin to play with the line in its physical form. And again, this notion of the illustration in a 3-dimensional space begins to enter. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this work and also the relationship with the work and the site?
Yeah. I mean, this work came after the move back from Berlin to Real, after the finishing of that residency. And I was very aware that I was very eager to come back because, you know, in Berlin, everything was available. You wanted a specific material, it was available, you could access it. And it was too much. I wanted restriction again. And I knew I was going to find a material that I could kind of wield and number. And stumbled out upon this material, which is often confused with some sort of statement about oil. But in reality, for me, it's a sculptural ink line that I can wield and kind of produce very instinctively in space. So it's a sculptural sketch. And this happened this work specifically first happened at an old palace where the first oil, agreement of understanding was signed between Saudi Arabia and the United States. And so I wanted to create this kind of work which told that story of the beginning of our finding of oil, but kind of relying on this instinctive flow state in creating something to find our way out into a new into a new avenue. And I mean, this could be an interesting topic, seeing how this is Ithra and Aramco.
Right. And we'll see these parallel threads and registers coming in at multiple times.
Yes.
I'll move very quickly to the next work. This is another picture of the same work. The next was a solo that the both of us worked together on. And
my favorite time.
This is mine. But maybe before we come to this work, I think we should begin here. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the exhibition, how it started out?
I mean, we entered into or I forced you into a month-long kind of dialogue about for the solo, and I knew that you were somebody I could kind of get into some very deep conversations with, and we stumbled upon the work of Charles Bliss with Bliss Symbolics, and he developed these ideograms or visual language per se, and his hopes was to develop a symbolic language that couldn't be corrupted or usurped by systems, or the meaning was pure and kind of was encased within this image or symbol. But of course, it did get corrupted and misused and translated, which drove him, mad. So we wanted to go back and look at the hardened word, the intolerant word, the racist word, the hateful word, and we wanted to grind it away. We wanted to take that solid pigment of meaning and grind it away down to its infinite potential of meaning, the powder, the infinity of possibility. And then we agitated that pigment using vibration and sound, resulting in new landscapes, where from that we developed this process of where illustrating is reading, which is the title of this talk.
Right.
So the act of illustrating these new ideograms, these new symbols that are not based on anything, they're not icons, they're not logos, they are unique, open for interpretation in an early state of coming to life.
One of the things that this exhibition did was, while it also was a study of your practice, which is a return to illustration, which was a return to the study of pigment, which is why there was charcoal, which played a huge role as a starting point, but also the narrative of meaning making and the possibility of words turning rigid, as we were saying, and the best of intentions turning into rigid forms that then dictate the world or dictate certain kinds of structures that are shared across cultures around the world. And one of the things that we came across, which is where the title of this talk comes from, the notion of the illustrators to read, was this particular artwork, the reading ring. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, the reading ring took the concept of a memorization ring, where you would kind of sit in a circle and sort of memorize the holy book, the Quran. And what we did here, we kind of rotated the idea of this ring and created an endless reading ring, where you're not memorizing, but you're constantly reading and kind of asking questions and rereading and re-exploring this landscape of meaning. So again, it was taking this new approach with meaning, with language, and exploring. I guess what we wanted to do in the beginning was to turn this into, to demonstrate the work needed in reforming the word. So the whole exhibition was kind of you walking through this process of grinding, of sort of reusing, sort of transfer. How do we transfer, this kind of moving soup of meaning? And that's kind of where it could lead us to the, I guess, this piece where, where I used tape.
Yeah.
And it all came from a sense of play. And it was kind of, we would find these things and we just kind of grab onto them because we knew we had something. So using something as simple as tape and pressing it down on this, pigment that's been brought to life with vibration, you would create a transfer. So this work showed how this repetitive, simple act of transfer of a strip of information or meaning loses its nuance, its richness, its subtle meaning. Every generation we attempt to transfer this meaning until there's nothing left to take from.
And one of the things that would happen quite often is, and again across cultures, is there's this sort of struggle and this tension to, and also a desire to learn from our histories, as well as a loss and transmission from generation to generation, as you're talking about. And I think this work shows that beautifully. I'm really drawn to the details of the work. Let's speak about this work a little bit, and as well, just maybe you want to talk to us a little bit about the process, because each of these scrolls is almost 30 feet long, as well as, which I know was quite a laborious process, and also about this notion of practice of the free word.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So again, this came from this, experimentation with the pigments and paper, and this was a continuous roll of paper that was, pigment was introduced, and then it was kind of using sound. It was kind of allowed to move and create these natural patterns, these kind of surprising, and the act of re-rolling it onto itself created a print transfer onto the other side, almost like a copy. So we kind of decided to use these scrolls to create sort of like a non-functioning printing press, and kind of addressing the idea of free speech and even, free-flowing word through an inactive machine, per se, a silent machine.
I want to move very quickly to the next project, which is The Words We Forge, which is derived from that exhibition in a sense.
Yes.
There was a work that moved forward from that, and I'd love for you to share with us a little bit about the work, but also a little bit about why the participatory nature of the work as well.
So this did come from our work on the solo and the concepts there, and it was a commission, and it's part of the ITHRA collection at the moment. And again, the idea of a machine that does work, the act of forging, was kind of interesting here, in creating something where it's sort of like a keyboard or an input machine for a language that doesn't exist yet. So the keys are actually divorced of any characters or any meaning, and yet what they suspend and what they're connected to are these sculptural pieces, much like the hardened word, in a very early stage of being formed. So the act of kind of saying without saying anything is sort of working on polishing and shaping over time. So it's a time sort of installation as well, I think. So they're all being submerged into this pool of shot put, like these steel balls that are slowly eroding and erasing and polishing away these future words.
These possibilities. I want to show them the video. I would love, very quickly, because this work as well has quite a bit to do with the sound, which reminds me almost of these blacksmiths that sort of like hammer or forge simultaneously, almost synchronously.
Often sound is a mistake in my work. Like it just comes from the nature of things moving and movement and the material choice, and it's never by intention. Even
with the ritual machines.
Yeah, I mean, in ritual machines, sound was important. Like it's part of ritual, the rhythm, but it came from creating something that had a certain structure, a certain repetition, certain form, and allowing it to move, and that created the rhythm, rather than having a specific sound you wanted to achieve.
Right. And in a way, I guess also the algorithm generates that, which is asynchronous and synchronous rhythms. This was a work that drew quite a bit of attention recently. Do you want to tell us why it drew attention?
Yeah, I got into trouble. This work was, there's no date to it, and it's called Until You or We Return. And It was in the process of being sort of the negotiations. It was meant to happen, hopefully, and these were part of the visualizations for the work. But then the pandemic happened in March, and everything went into lockdown, and projects got delayed or canceled. So it was sort of ready in my mind, or it sort of happened in my mind, and it kind of played an interesting role in this idea of, well, if nobody could go there to check if it was there, then maybe it was actually there.
Right.
So I kind of very innocently posted it online, but then people really did think that this was happening now, and a lot of questions were being asked, and was this approved? And I had to clarify eventually that this was not yet, this was just speculative. But this was kind of interesting about this notion of real versus digital, which we were all forced to accept that digital was now our reality.
Right.
And I thought that was appropriate to share.
I mean, it's also a really interesting sort of possible AR project, but I would love to see it realized, but also when and if it is, find a way to do justice to the heritage as well, and find a way to structurally support the building and preserve it.
And that's what they were meant to do. They're these voids representative of absent people, absent stories, and they are actually structural. So they're there to reinforce and support their a permanent installation for as long as we allow that structure to be in disuse and decay. Once we renovate and bring life back to it, these installations will leave.
Inshallah, I hope this gets realized. And we're now at the last project, which is The Lost Path. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Desert X and a little bit about this work and how this came to be? I'd also love to show everybody a quick video of the work.
You have a video?
Yes, we do. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the title, The Lost Path?
The Lost Path. This is part of an exhibition that happened in Al-Ula. It is a sort of in a series of exhibitions that were occurring in California, Desert X. Kind of conversations with the desert, and it was curated by Ranim Farsi and Ali Rida and also Neville Wakefield. So the work was meant to trigger kind of a sense of adventure, kind of like a treasure map that, I was always kind of attracted to this idea of being a hero or a character, let's say. I don't know about hero, but a character in a desolate location and stumbling upon an amazing adventure, whether that's a relic to an ancient civilization or the hulking structure of an ancient, mighty creature. And this kind of call to adventure. So the work was meant to be actually only 20% of the work is visible from the main site of Desert X. The rest is hidden, and it's not a work that was meant to be photographed from one position, but rather experienced. So that's all you could see from the main location. And it's again a sculptural sketch. So it's me responding to this location, much like drawing on a sheet of paper.
Mm-hmm.
So if you responded to this call to adventure and you followed this path that is very small and thin in the beginning, a singular thread that then becomes single-minded and sculptural, but then at some point liquid and limitless in its possibilities, then, you know, I wanted to gift people this childlike sense of wonder and adventure, not leading them to any treasure, because often the treasure, the chest is empty at the end of the adventure once you find it. But what I wanted for people was to find themselves alone in this very quiet, solitary space where there is no sound, to find themselves alone with themselves. And it was interesting to see not everybody kind of followed this path to the end. Some just kind of admired it from a distance, or said, okay, that's cool, and moved on. Some went halfway, but then heard about this very quiet space at the end and missed out in a way. And they would tell me that this is one of their, you know, biggest regrets, not following the path to the end. So kind of, it was interesting also the responses that people had to their choice of whether to follow this path to the end or not.
I was one of the people that stumbled across this this little cove, which was so peaceful and so quiet and so empty, but that was desirable in a sense. Do you want to tell us a little bit about just the sheer volume of the production of the work?
Yeah, these were, yeah, sorry.
Just curious about how many people were helping you out, because this is such an expansive work that really sort of draws this imaginary across a landscape, right? So I'm just curious about all the help that you got, perhaps production hurdles that you came across, as well in a site like Al-Ula, which is somewhat remote.
The work was around 65,000 pipes. Over 300 meters of total length, and some extreme change in elevation. So to actually descend, even carrying nothing, just to speak to somebody at the halfway points of the installation was quite a commitment. And there was no network reception, so you couldn't kind of call people and speak to them. So because this was up to a point planned out, but in reality, again, site-specific, responding to the location, you know, the act of bringing the whole team together and kind of conveying the idea through cold, through, it was pretty cold. Sometimes when it was sunny, it was really hot. So you're tired, you're exhausted, you're frustrated, and you're trying to remain in this kind of positive headspace and convey this idea of something that you're not sure yet how it's going to look to a team. So that really, I wanted to give a sense of ownership to everybody involved. And it is a sculptural sketch after all, but I never quite want to know how things are going to end, much like a drawing. If I know the ending, then I'm kind of just copying, and the process of creation is suspended. So a lot of time, once the work was done, it isn't as exciting as kind of figuring out what it's going to look like and how to actually get there as a team.
Yeah, which comes back again to this notion of finding form and reading as you illustrate. That's the end of us sharing the works, and we'd love for you all to share comments, to share questions with us. We have 2 questions, and I was wondering if anybody wanted to dial in and share their thoughts with us through voice. We have Nadine. Nora, would you like to let Nadine?
Hi.
Hi, Nadine.
Can you hear me, guys?
Yeah. Hi, Nadine.
You can't see me though, right?
No, we can't.
Okay, good. So I just wanted to say it was the first time that I had seen The Silence is Talking, and what really struck me is the idea that Antonio Gramsci actually has spoken about, which was infinity of traces, leaving an infinity of traces without an inventory. And that really, really struck me when I looked at the form of the work. And so a lot of your work seems to be related to the line, to the beginning of thought, to the beginning of language, and yet you never actually write something in a sense. Even your rituals, even the ritual work, ritualistic work, was more of an empty performative gesture from what I saw. Like a lot of the work exists in its absence. And then you said something very interesting about wanting to return from Berlin because you need to work within these restrictions. So, you know, I found it quite interesting how you are creating out of this void. And there's so much rich context that is related to particular, again, we're talking about illustration, so particular historical stories and incidents, and yet you're leaving just the remnants and just the traces. And I was just wondering, you know, because your earlier work was a bit more figurative or a bit more, you know, the drawing was less abstract, and then you just seem to subtract and go more and more conceptual. I don't want to use the term wrongly, but do you know what I mean? Like kind of reducing things to their, you know, essence, yeah. but yet not erasing, you know?
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
It's a great question. It's actually a lot of the things I would agonize developing the solo, and Raoul would have to listen, but it was about the death of the figurative, the death of the character, and the losing that connection with that world. And I think the first work I did, which we didn't include, which was Children of Yam, I literally zoomed out from the details and that overly illustrated world, and everything became abstract, small, and the landscape. And I didn't realize I was doing that, but I could no longer see the characters. And so that was a kind of a subconscious response to the realization that I had to step away or zoom out. And language as well, like Raoul, you know, you kind of made that same point. Is like, I seem like I don't want to commit to either Arabic or English. And that's not necessarily because of any reason, but because in English, I'm dyslexic. So I can't actually write as fast as I can visualize.
Right.
So I kind of turned towards the visual first way as a language.
And also this intersection between the prelingual and where communication truly happens is quite often between words, and quite often between minds, and quite often unspoken. And then very often, as these forms come to life, they are, in a way, the words and sentences and stories that are taking shape. Nadine, did you have something else that you wanted to say and follow up? If not, if there was somebody else that wanted to say something before we move to questions. While we do that, there's a question for you, Muhannad, from Sarah, and she asks, how has your practice changed over time, and what about COVID-19 did it affect on your practices, and how do you overcome it?
No, nothing's been affected. If anything, it's become more focused, because I'm fortunately or unfortunately one of those people who is very, you know, is okay being in a space and kind of working day in, day out. So, you know, the opposite, I think, for me, going out is the difficult part. So this has been very comfortable in a way, as tragic as it has been. It's been, you know, I didn't want to dishonor the moment in a way, and I wanted to continue to work and produce and not come out of it sort of, it's not an excuse to kind of stand still.
And also you had this conflict with everything moving digital, right? Which kind of sort of like immersed you back into your own illustrative practice. And I'm wondering if you're doing more illustrative research.
I mean, I got a little upset with you. I'm gonna, like, when should I say it?
No, let's move. Let's move on to the next question, which is, what piece are you most proud of and why?
I think the work we did together, because for sure, I'm not being nice for no reason, but I think because it was like a very honest, genuine month of just no judgment, and you allowed me to be kind of quite vulnerable with my struggles with my work and losing the character, using the figurative, trying to reintroduce narrative, and for that, I'm eternally grateful. So that's the biggest thing that I take from that work, and it's often about not so much the work, it's what leads you there.
Mm-hmm. Then it was a lovely journey moving from that and coming back to the study of the line, and then finding that study of the line, then becoming a thread that like now runs through your works. Yep. and remains with them. We have about 5 minutes before we end the session. I just wanted to ask everybody if they had any other questions or comments.
Like just because there's no questions.
Yeah.
One interesting thing as well is that the realization about my work, or the role of the line or the ink, and linking that back to my childhood, a lot of those realizations only came to be end of last year. So, you're constantly learning about, who you are, what's your work about. And for anybody out there that's kind of struggling with uncertainty about their ideas, whatever that is, you shouldn't beat yourself up or put yourself down, because this is a beautiful part of finding the answers. Your brain is in the process of giving you the answer. You need to just trust in the process and in time, and not kind of give up on that exploration.
There's a question from Nadine. She asks, do you also see your work as a form of expanded architecture, at times translating from one form to another, especially in terms of sound?
Yeah, I studied architecture, but never practiced. So I'm sort of like scratching that itch through a lot of the work and trying to introduce form and I'm fascinated by architecture for sure, and I see them being as one and the same in many respects.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that when you were speaking earlier about constantly exploring, one of the things I think that you've been able to do successfully is actually hold that vulnerability close that we spoke about, which is to, with every work, revisit that, and then find that as a way to explore possibilities that you otherwise might not have backed, and then through that research and through that study, allow those things to come to life. And I mean, Until You Return is sort of a good example of that. It's sort of like this playful response to something that wasn't realized, and again continues on with this relationship with the built environment and this return to a relationship with architecture, and just as well also the works which are spatial, which is also, for instance, the Caliph, which we haven't spoken about here, but also other works that we have spoken about that use the line in spatial forms. And I'm wondering if there's other things that you're playing with right now that you can share with us.
No, but there is a constant.
Is that a no you can't share with us, or is that a
no? I can't share, but no, there are some really interesting things happening that are again building upon these realizations and moving forward. In ways that hopefully will surprise me as well, because in the end, I'm trying to enjoy the story as I write it. I think this question's for you, Raoul, because I don't think of myself as a, I say this sometimes, I don't think of myself as an artist. I didn't quite grow up admiring or following contemporary art. But there's a question from someone anonymous. Maybe you could answer.
Sorry, one second. I'm just gonna. I don't have experience. I'll just read this out for everybody. I don't have experience in contemporary art, but interested to learn more. Do you have any advice? I think with again, for you, what you were just saying, Muhannad, with contemporary art, what's particularly interesting also is to expand the notion of what it is that is contemporaneous, both in terms of its relevance as an expression, as a commodity, and as material and all of that, but also in relation to histories, in relation to whether it's vernaculars, and there's of course certain texts that one could turn to. A very easy read is Claire Bishop's installation art, which in a way threads, of course, it's a Western art history primarily, but it's an interesting place to begin because it drives you through the shifts that took place with contemporary art, and also introduces you to some of the reasons and mechanics of why that happened. That's a good place to begin if one hasn't had an introduction, for instance. But there's always this desire to constantly question. For instance, also this need for something to be accompanied by a thesis or politics. And Nadine spoke about this as well when she was sort of speaking with you, which was very often artworks just speak for themselves and they don't necessarily need to be accompanied by texts. So there's multiple registers that can simultaneously exist and multiple practices that can simultaneously exist, material, conceptual. I hope that helps.
I think we're at 9 o'clock, unfortunately.
We're out of time, unfortunately. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you. This was lovely. Thank you, Itra, for giving us this opportunity. Thanks, Muhannad. It was always lovely to speak with you. Thanks for everybody that joined us, and we hope to see you soon. Please keep following Itra and keep an eye out for the upcoming sessions with Art Society.
See you all soon in real life.